Hello and welcome to the CyberCX Cyber Dialogue webinar on skills sovereignty. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. My name is Shannon Lane and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at CyberCX, and I'll be your moderator for today. This webinar is the 7th in the series on the topic that has always been of great interest to me personally, building a sovereign cyber skills capability. I've been in the cybersecurity game for over 20 years now, having first cut my teeth in the industry as a RACF mainframe administrator. And I'm sure many of you listening today will not know what RACF is or have ever spent any time on a mainframe. But during my time in cybersecurity, I've certainly had a number of career changes, which requires the maintenance of skills, a commitment to learning, development of new skills, and keeping an open mind on how the industry continues to evolve. In fact, if you look back just a few years, we associated ourselves as being in the information security industry rather than being in the cybersecurity industry. So even the naming has changed. Cybersecurity skills and the development of capability are undeniably a key issue within Australia and globally. The shift in cybersecurity to be an enabling business function is now largely understood and accepted, but the challenge of finding and developing the right sort of capability to enable businesses large and small remains. A strong sovereign security capability is important for Australia, for our economy, for our workforce, our citizenry, and for our future prosperity. And the cyber dialogue for this week focuses on the critical role cyber skills plays in our sovereign cyber capability. To assist in exploring the skills issue, we'll draw on some of our own insights and on your specific questions about cyber sovereignty. We'll deep dive into the topic today and attempt to cover off on what a strong sovereign skills capability looks like, what are the current skills gaps, who do we need to fill those gaps, how do we address the imperative of greater inclusion and diversity, where do we draw skills from, and how do we open doors from other professions, and how do we foster skills from an earlier age, just to name a few. We'll also talk about enabling cross-training and education skills pathways. Today, again, we have a large number of registrants for this particular webinar. You have, again, sent through some great questions for our guests that will promote creative thinking and hopefully challenge a few assumptions. CyberCX is driven to build a compelling sovereign capability in the cybersecurity arena, and we focus every day on delivering value to our clients and to the nation at large. In terms of an agenda today, and based on the significant number of questions proposed in the lead up to this webinar, we will revert back to our Q&A format that you've become used to, where we'll ask our two guests the questions that you have sent through. We will again run two polls during the webinar and share the results at the end of the session. If we have time, we'll also finish with rapid fire Q&A to answer the online questions that you have sent through whilst listening. So please use the chat facility to lodge any questions that you may have. Today, again, we have two outstanding guests, Alastair MacGibbon, who has become a bit of a feature of these webinars, and Jankulovski. Before joining CyberCX as the Chief Strategy Officer, Alastair was the National Cybersecurity Advisor and head of the Australian Cybersecurity Centre within the Australian Signals Directorate. He was Special Advisor to the Prime Minister on cybersecurity and has served as Australia's first e-safety Commissioner. Alastair also established the Australian Federal Police's High-Tech Crime Centre during his long tenure with the AFP, and previously worked at eBay as its Senior Director of Trust, Safety and Customer Support. He has also been the local CEO of information security certification not-for-profit Crest Australia. Snez is an experienced senior HR leader with over 20 years of experience encompassing all elements of HR. She has worked extensively in small and large complex organisations in partnership with many leaders, including CIOs, CEOs, executive committees, general managers and emerging leaders. Having held a range of HR-related roles at Cox Automotive, Dimension Data, Telstra and the Department of Premier and Cabinet Victoria, Snez has been recognised as a HR Director of the Year finalist in 2019, appearing on the HRD Hot List and Innovative Teams list in 2019. So thank you both for joining us today. Alastair, we might kick off the discussion with a question directed at you. The first question we have is, what does a strong sovereign cyber skills capability look like?
Well, thanks, Shannon, and good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be with you yet again. Well, Shannon, most people who know me know I'm a bit of a nationalist, so it's fair to say that I think a sovereign capability is very important for any country, and particularly Australia. Look, COVID has driven a really interesting debate much more broadly about sovereignty in Australia and the ability for us as a nation to manufacture things that are important. It's called into question our very extended supply chains and our part in the global economy. Now, nothing I say is going to suggest that we disengage ourselves globally, of course. But what I do say is this issue of self-reliance is important. Now, what we do know, Shannon, is that the vast bulk of cybersecurity technology and cybersecurity services actually come from offshore. To me, as someone that spent my life going in and out of government on the national side, I'm disturbed by the level of reliance we actually have on overseas providers and services. Let me use an example. In COVID, we know that call centres and SOCs were shut down offshore. What I don't know is how exposed were various Australian businesses during that time, because you literally don't know whether your provider is there or not. And this isn't a shameless plug, but our SOCs are in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, Wellington, New Zealand, of course. We keep our data on Australia, and our people are in Australia. I think this is actually about making sure that at least a core part of our cyber capability in Australia is actually in Australia. And as a consequence, it means that you've got a strong pipeline of people, that you have a pyramid-shaped skills basis where the bulk of people are junior and being trained and working their way through an organization. They might start like you did in the racks, in the server racks, and work their way up to an executive position in a sovereign cybersecurity company like CyberCX. But it's important that we employ young people, diverse people. All the topics we're going to be talking about today make Australia much more secure, and it gets us to that point of that sovereign capability. Thanks.
Thank you, Alastair. That's great. That actually leads us really nicely into a question I might pose to Snez. Snez, what do you think the best current estimate is on the skills gap within cybersecurity within Australia?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Shannon, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be on this webinar. Look, I think measuring the precise size of a skills shortage can sometimes be a little bit difficult, I think, because of the dynamic nature of the labour market. But we understand that it's estimated that in Australia we may need around just short of 17,000 additional cybersecurity workers in the next 5 years, and that's across both technical and non-technical positions. And it's a severe shortage of job-ready workers, and that's an operational challenge, for us in this sector, but also, a barrier to growth for the cybersecurity sector. And look, my experience is, having now worked in this, having worked in tech for quite some time, is that there really is no silver bullet in this space. And I'm sure Alastair would agree with me here. We need to approach this in a variety of ways. We need to look at how we build that supply of cybersecurity skills in Australia. And I think, government, industry and academia need to work together. We need to collaborate more. We have to invest in vocational training and apprenticeships to upskill people. We need to retrain people, those people who are keen to enter in the cybersecurity space. And I think critically, all these skills discussions have to also focus on attracting a more diverse workforce. I'm really passionate about attracting more women in the technology sector, and in particular in cybersecurity. So we've got to look at different ways of attracting talent in both the technical and the non-technical areas. I think the education sector has also a big role to play. I know, there are shortages. If you look at some of the graduates that are starting to now come out of, cybersecurity qualifications, it's only just recently that they've, that they're doing that, and we're only just starting to see that supply increase a little, and that's providing some clear paths for people to, to help close that demand gap between, the demand and supply for cybersecurity skills. But, it's going to take some time for us to be able to build that supply. And I think the challenge for the Australian cybersecurity skills sector is really, we have to do something now. We have to take action. We have to invest further, in these skills and in the education sector. And I think to close that gap in the short and medium term, I think we've got to look at workers in the more broader IT sector and other industries that would have relevant knowledge or skills and ability that can easily transition into cybersecurity workforce. And I think there's a significant opportunity for us, as an organisation and other organisations in this industry to really look at how we can adapt the skills of existing IT professionals to enable them to come into the cybersecurity space. I think it's also evident that there's a lack of workers that are transitioning into cybersecurity from industries outside of IT. I mean, I think a lot of organisations still tend to recruit on technical skills, and this is despite the well-acknowledged need that we do need to improve soft skills, in the tech industry. And workers in this particular sector. And I think there's just a lack of understanding of the different career paths spanning technical and non-technical security roles. So, I think it's a multi-pronged approach, and we've got to think more broadly and outside the box if we're going to help close that gap. Thanks, Shannon.
Fantastic, Snez. That's brilliant. I might just jump straight into the next question now, because again, I think we're starting to lead into nice segues.
Shut me down early, Shannon.
No, not at all. Not at all, Alastair. I actually think
I can tell. I can detect it. Didn't take you long.
I'll try and be a bit more expansive from here on in Alastair. But I think, again, the next one really is a good one for you to provide additional commentary around. Who do we need to fill gaps? Where do they come from? How do we educate our society broadly about specific cyber security skills outcomes? What do you think we need there?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is, as you can tell, a continuation of really what Snez was talking about. I'll start with saying that we pretty much need a much more diverse group of people than what we've got. I'm speaking to you, of course, as a white, middle-aged male who make up, sadly, the vast bulk of the cybersecurity community. And look, it's easy from someone sitting in a privileged position to be saying we need whole heap of other people in it, but I've had the advantage, of course, in my career. But how do you drive change? I mean, we know that diverse teams lead to better outcomes. One of the things I would say is, and Snez has touched on this, and we should touch on a lot more as an industry, and we should be frankly ashamed of ourselves if I want to be a bit more blunt. Look at the absolute lack of women in technical roles in organisations. At ASD, I had a pretty good mix, frankly, probably higher in government. So I'd say government often has a much more diverse background than the private sector. It's a big call, I know, and if anyone disagrees, feel free to jump on in on the chat and tell our friend Shannon here. But clearly we need diverse thinkers. I've always said that cybersecurity is one of the great existential threats we face as a society. I still think it is, even in a year where we've had catastrophic bushfires well beyond any we'd ever seen before, and a COVID-19 which literally shut our global economy down. I still say cybersecurity is an existential threat. Now, if it's an existential threat and we've only got 50% of the addressable gene pool that we're drawing upon for that, then we're in a world of hurt. And it means that we actually need to get diverse thinkers into this to solve problems. Because if you're giving us a score, if we were giving ourselves like a report card on how well we've gone, you'd be giving us a C or a D. You're not going to give us A's and B's. We're not solid performers. And that means we should look at what our skills mix is, look at where we're drawing people from to solve these problems, because we can't do much worse of a job, frankly. Now, what should be done? Clearly, the federal government's announced the Job Maker program. We've been pretty explicit in saying to the government that we think cybersecurity skills should be one of those areas that are supported under Job Maker. And to be fair to the federal government, since the former Prime Minister launched the National Cybersecurity Strategy in 2016, there's been investment in building cybersecurity skills in Australia. So we're not coming from a zero base. But we clearly need to be getting vocational training. And I know we'll talk more about vocational training. I'm making the assumption we will in the next 45 minutes or so, but we need to see more vocational training of people of diverse backgrounds. People have got to get away, and in my traditional way, I'm going to probably answer some questions that are asked later. And that is, we've got to get away from this concept of having to be tertiary degrees. They can be, frankly, a vendor-related certificate. I'm agnostic to that. I mean, if you want to go and get yourself a Cisco or a Microsoft or some other credential and do a 6-week course, then let's get you going. Let's get you in. Employers have got to change the types of skills they're asking for. We've got to get away from everyone needing 5 to 10 years worth of experience. I fall into this trap every damn day where I say, give me a person who can already prove they're doing the job. Well, we wonder why we've got a shortage. We need people with lateral thinking. We've got to change the image of people in the cybersecurity industry away from, dark lit rooms, or dark unlit rooms and people in hoodies, right? I mean, we've just got to get away from that. As much fun as it sounds to people, and as much fun as it is for journalists and people to always portray people in cybersecurity that way, they tend to work in either brightly lit offices or frankly from home these days. And they're pretty normal people who are helping protect the communities they live in. I'm not sure even if I've touched on answering your question, Shannon, but you should probably shut me down at this stage, or else that's good. Wind up the whole webinar.
No, that's fine. That's great. So I think I'm getting loud and clear through that you're making a call for cyber hipsters amongst others. So that's awesome. We will jump to the next question. And Snez, if I can get you to provide some commentary on this one. And I think it's a really good, again, lead in from Alastair's commentary around diversity. The concept of security as a core ICT function rather than a business function has kept women and non-technical candidates away from the cybersecurity industry. How does cybersecurity professionals, or how can cybersecurity professionals and leaders address the limitations of this misconception?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Shannon. Look, I think that's a great segue from the previous question. Look, to echo Alastair's comments, there's no doubt that, the tech industry and in particular cybersecurity companies, we've got a diversity issue. And, if I remember from some of the previous organisations I've worked in this sector, there was always a challenge. There has always been a challenge around increasing diversity, and in particular, gender diversity for cybersecurity. I remember reading the stats. It's about 25% female across the board in Australia, and if we look globally, research is showing that percentage is just 11%. So although we're doing, better than some of our global counterparts, there's certainly steps that a lot of companies are doing, moving in the right direction, but, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, in that diversity space. And I think we need to remind ourselves here that, as Alastair, mentioned, diversity and gender diversity, it's not a women's issue. This is a business issue. This is, how do we create scale up a skilled, diverse workforce? Because we know that diversity, leads to fantastic and great, business outcomes, higher innovation, better decision making, higher levels of employee engagement, faster problem solving, all of those great things. And so, so I think for us as leaders and people in the HR realm would recognise that we've got to commit to building these diverse teams and embracing diverse perspectives and experiences, and that means we've got to source people and source talent from different backgrounds, different experiences, different sectors, because everybody, there are great skills that we can hire to help us, build these amazing organisations that lead to great outcomes for our customers. So I think, there's lots more work to be done. It's the responsibility for everyone. It's not just, organisations. I think, high schools and tertiary education providers also have to find ways to encourage students, in particular female students, to pursue, careers, those STEM careers in science, technology, engineering and maths, and, and in particular careers in cybersecurity. And there are already some great initiatives and organisations like the Australian Women's Security Network, and various other, organisations like, I think it's Girls Who Code. So there's lots of good stuff out there, but, as an organisation, I think we have a role to play. I mean, at CyberCX, we've got a big focus on diversity. We're committed to gender diversity. We want to improve the representation rates of women in our business, and there's lots of good initiatives that we're working on at the moment to get to that. But it's going to take some time, and we need to everyone has a role to play. Thanks, Shannon.
No, fantastic, Alastair. I might throw to you as well. I loved Snez's comment. Gender diversity is not a women's issue; it's a business issue. I think that's really quite powerful.
Well, it goes back to that concept that if we do think cybersecurity is an existential threat, let's get the best from the human gene pool to be addressing it. And you're not going to get the best of the human gene pool if you're only getting 50% of the population thinking that cybersecurity is a career for them. It's really simple, right? It'll be the same for ethnic minorities, same for people on different parts of the spectrum in terms of the way they think. I mean, essentially, this is a problem that we face as a society. We need to fix it as a society. Humans are resilient creatures, and we should be making sure that we get the best thinkers and the best workers in this space. Crazy as an employer, firstly, that you're not doing that. I mean, it just goes without saying. And I've never met, by the way, an employer in this industry that would intentionally shun a female candidate. But I think to Snez's point, they're just not applying for positions. Part of that probably goes right back to choices of subject at schools. And, we've seen a big push over the last several years for women in STEM. And look, I'll always support those programs. It's great. I'm not sure if that solves the problem either, though, because of the image of the industry. And so it's all of these bits. We've got to move every one that we can, every lever that we can touch to try to change that dynamic till we get to that tipping point. More women in these roles will lead to more women in these roles. And we've just got to do whatever we can to get to it. As I say, I mean, look, I think government's done a better job of it, frankly. And that's a statement most people don't ever utter. But I think when it comes to getting women into technical roles, government's been better at it. And we're going to get, I'm sure, to questions about what role government has to play. And one of them is it's a great incubator of skills. And as it sheds that DNA out to the broader community as they've trained people up, that's an opportunity for us to pick people. But we do need to, it goes right back to, girls in coding, women in STEM, changing the culture, the workplace culture. Cybersecurity is not alone there, of course. And I say that again as a privileged white male who spent his entire career in male-dominated professions, whether it's policing, or other places, but it does have to change. I keep going back to the fact, Shannon, then I'm going to shut up, is if this is the existential threat, which most people on this webinar would think, it's going to be the number 1 or number 2 or number 3 business risk for every organisation, public or private sector, then for God's sake, let's work out how we can get a better percentage of the smart people in this community to be helping protect the people that they love.
Fantastic. Clear call to action there, I think, for all of us in the industry. So thank you, Snez and Alastair. Look, what we might do now is jump to the first of our 2 polls. It's a really nice, again, use the word segue a lot today, but it's a great segue in terms of how we see ourselves and what's the most important factor to address gender diversity in cyber. We've got a few options here in terms of strong leadership and an active focus on diversity, great awareness of diversity and a supportive culture, a focus on building multifunctional teams, better education pathways into STEM subjects at school, or don't know. And we normally keep these polls open for about 20 seconds, give you an opportunity to provide a response, and at the conclusion of the webinar, we'll feed back that response to you.
Have you got any music, Shannon? I mean, I hate to ask.
Still no music, Alastair. Sorry,
seriously,
mate.
How many webinars have we done now?
Yeah, it is the 7th.
One job. One job, seriously. I mean, I think Natasha, who's hiding in the background here, was saying there'd be some copyright issues, but I'm sure we can get around those at some point, surely.
Yeah.
Can you sing for us or tap dance?
Look, I can tap dance because that's mainly a visual medium, so I think I'll get away with that, but definitely no singing.
All right, well, start practicing.
Will do. All right, thanks everybody. We might jump into the next one, and Snez, I'll throw to you if that's all right. Where do we draw skills from? And I know you sort of started to move us in that direction. How do we open doors from other professions, especially from professions that are at the non-technical end of the spectrum?
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Look, it's a really good question. I think, you know, we touched on some of this in a couple of the earlier questions. You know, as I said earlier, I think we've got to think differently about where we source talent. I think we've got to think just beyond just the IT sector, and you know, looking at different pathways for the skills and for people to come into cybersecurity. I think definitely looking at existing IT professionals to, you know, to really enable them to take up more specific cybersecurity roles. And so, you know, to Alastair's point, you don't have to have a specific qualification in cybersecurity. You know, you can get that, or you can, you know, certainly at CyberCX, we're looking at how we can build and that talent. You know, whether we look at graduate programs where we bring in, you know, younger, you know, workers who may have a qualification. It might be in IT or a STEM, you know, discipline, or perhaps even, you know, another general business discipline. But for people who may have a specific interest in cybersecurity, I think we've got to think more broadly than just the IT, you know, IT sector. I think there's also, you know, there's just this lack of understanding of the different career paths that span both the technical and non-technical security roles. I think, as Alastair mentioned, you know, there's so much more to cybersecurity than just hacking or penetration testers. I mean, there's diversity and variety in roles such as, you know, policy, governance, risk. You know, you can be a project manager in the cybersecurity space, you can do consulting, or perhaps even work in a client-facing role. So I think we've got to broaden people's, you know, understanding of what a career in cybersecurity looks like, and that's not necessarily just a technical role. Of course, we need those skills. We need people with the technical skills, but we also need other skills. You know, we need great, you know, great communicators. We need people who are great problem solvers, and people who are obsessed about, you know, going the extra mile for our customers. So, you know, we're looking to recruit people from different backgrounds. And when we've got a large number of people in our organisation that have come from other professions, you know, they've come from, you know, ex-defence roles, or perhaps have been, you know, police officers like, you know, our very own Alastair MacGibbon, or perhaps they've come from the public service. So, you know, I think we've got to really broaden our approach to sourcing talent and looking at different pathways for people to come into the organisation and building those skills. So bringing in the junior talent, partnering with TAFEs, partnering with universities, you know, to bring in those emerging talent and helping build their careers in cybersecurity. So again, my answer to that is, you know, we've got to think, you know, we've got to think broadly and have a wide source of, you know, sourcing channels for bringing in talent. Thanks, Shannon.
Very good. Alastair, I might get you to answer the next question, if that's all right, because we have talked about, you know, cyber being an existential threat to us as an economy and a nation, and, you know, the lack of, you know, women coming through STEM subjects. How do we foster cyber skills from an earlier age?
Well, again, you know, there's probably a lot of overlap in this. I mentioned the concept of women in STEM and encouraging people to take STEM subjects, but we've also established that it's not just STEM that's important from a cybersecurity point of view, as Snez was just saying. Part of me says it's things like gamification, you know, so teaching kids about cybersecurity and the importance of cybersecurity through games. Look, the e-safety office, which I used to head, but now is it's got Julie Inman-Grant as the e-safety commissioner now, does a lot in schools, And if you teach safety, then that's one part of it, as is privacy and security. And so that's an important way. And we've got a really good government office there doing that work. I know that people like AusCyber, who are federally funded, not-for-profit, looking for startups and scale-ups inside Australia, and I'll probably mention them again later today, have been doing good work in partnering with some corporates in some schools training. So I think that's one of the ways. A lot of people will talk about building cybersecurity into school curricula. And yeah, sure, I get that. But anyone who's ever looked at trying to build programs into schools and what kids are learning actually in class, it's a very crowded curriculum. We tend to push out a lot of the skills we'd probably like to see our kids graduating with, like being able to read and write. So we've got to be careful about that. One of the bits is educating parents. Because if I think about it, most kids talk to their parents about what they want to be when they grow up. And I think one of the areas we could be better at is to be saying to parents, hey, and look, I did a lot of time talking in schools and with school groups when I was the safety commissioner. And I'd say to parents, if you want your kids to grow up into a well-paid white collar position that tends to be pretty safe, as in safe in terms of job security, safe in terms of what hazards are around you, get them to go into cybersecurity. They're going to earn more money than you. They're going to have a job for life, sadly, because we're not going to fix this problem in one generation. So I think it's working with parents. It is clearly working around schools, but not necessarily in the school setting. And it's changing the perception of what hacking / cybersecurity is. I reckon that'd be the way I'd be addressing this, Shannon. I mean, I'm not sure, Snez, if you've got any extra views. I'm more than happy to be disagreed with, by the way, by anyone on the call.
Yeah, look, I tend to agree with you, Alastair. I mean, I talk to my kids about this all the time, and you know, my youngest, he's a gamer. He loves, you know, all that stuff, and you know, he often asks me questions about, you know, what we do at CyberCX, and you know, what our workforce do, and in particular, he's quite interested in that penetration testing space. So I think you're right. I think the conversation, you know, has to be with parents and with, you know, with schools, and encouraging them to, you know, educate and you know, continue to develop our kids, you know, understanding and to encourage careers in this space, because I absolutely agree with you. I think from a job security perspective and in terms of, you know, job enrichment and job fulfillment, there's so much, you know, so much variety, and our industry is, you know, probably the fastest changing industry. So, you know, there's always going to be work, there's always going to be interesting careers, and some of those we don't even know that they exist yet. You know, I think in the next sort of 5 to 10 years, there'll be jobs in this space that we, you know, haven't been thinking of right now. So I agree 100%. I think those conversations should start early.
Okay, that's great. Snez, I'm going to ask and pop to the next question. You know, do we focus too much on the sexy stuff? You know, you've talked about, you know, pen testing and people sort of gravitating towards that. The next question really talks about, you know, how can we encourage non-technical candidates to consider careers in cybersecurity, and what types of non-technical skills should you be looking for? Might get you to have a crack at that one first, if that's okay, and then maybe get some insights from Alastair as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Shannon. Look, I think, you know, I've covered a little bit of this in my earlier responses. I think you've got to be prepared, you know, to invest in reskilling people. I think, you know, we do focus on, you know, those jobs that are the most appealing, or the, you know, the sexy areas, if you like, of some of these, some of the technical and technical, you know, industry and technical professions. And I think, you know, we've got to be creative about how we market those roles, and focus on, you know, what types of careers can people build in an organisation in this space. And I think you've got to be on the lookout for great talent, whether that's people in technical roles or non-technical roles. And I think as an organisation, we've got to really be able to demonstrate what career pathways there are for people. You know, there are some people that want to stay in technical roles, and that's completely fine, and that's great because we need great technical skills. But then there are others who may start off in a technical field, but then want to branch off into, you know, consulting or you know, into a management or leadership position. So I think we've got to be able to demonstrate the possible career paths for people, you know, whether it's a non-technical, you know, career path or a technical one. So I think there's some work that needs to be done there around how we position those roles, and you know, and demonstrate the different career paths that people can take. I think the other thing that I will mention is that, you know, it's not just about the technical skills. I think working in this space, in the cybersecurity space in particular, you know, it's about how we deliver outcomes for the customers and the organisations that partner with us to provide the services and solutions that we offer. And I think, you know, if people are really excited about, you know, going that extra mile for customers, you know, solving complex problems, dealing with you know, some of these threats and challenges that we face as organisations, as a society, I think that's, you know, we've got to capture the hearts and minds of people, and, you know, be able to demonstrate, you know, the purpose and why we're here and what we do. And I think that's another great way for us to be able to encourage people to you know, to come and work in this sector and in organisations like ours.
Fantastic. Alastair, comments from you?
Well, I wonder whether it's even looking at things like, you know, there are things like the Dandelion project, where you're taking people on the autism spectrum and giving them really meaningful jobs in cybersecurity, actually using what some people would consider to be an impediment to the advantage of that person and of society more broadly. So, you know, you look at something like that where people have thought quite laterally and said, how do I take people who are ordinarily really, you know, hard for me to employ, but use their what are quite special skills to search for patterns, to find where the problems are in code, better than an in quotes mainstream person. And that's an example, I think, of the lateral thinking we need to be doing in this space, where we're just taking people and we're saying, hey, we've got a really serious problem. And let's face it, we do when it comes to cybersecurity. We are not resilient. We know that it is the greatest risk, as I've already said, facing organizations, or at least one of the top couple of risks. We know that for sure. That's a given. And look to see how you can solve those problems using other people. I mean, I sit there and look at it and think to myself, you know, I mean, I came from a policing background, right? I mean, you know, and some people who've had to deal with me over the years wish I would stay there or go somewhere else. But from that, and looking at the criminal aspects of the way people were misusing technology, I ended up in a cybersecurity field. I mean, it's quite incredible, really. And we need to have these open arms for others who are going to solve problems differently. Is it a detective? Is it someone on the autism spectrum? Is it a biologist who's been studying creatures and how they protect themselves or heal, and then apply that concept in a technical world? We just need to stop. I mean, one of the things I'd say about this profession or this community is it tends to try to prove it's smarter than everyone else all the time. And it's tended to allow the debate to be held by a very small part of this community, and it scares people away who say, hey, I reckon I've got a solution to this problem, or I think I can contribute to solving this problem. And we've just got to be better at saying, hey, tell me what it is you think, or can you show me and prove to me that what you're professing is going to be better? Because again, I'm just going to go back to the comment I made earlier. If we were giving ourselves an honest scorecard, we're a C or a D or an F actually in some areas. So how is it that we're not actively going outside the cybersecurity community saying, actually, I need your help? And frankly, we all know, and again, COVID showed this, when people ask for help, they tend to get it. And good people tend to step in and try to proffer support. And I just think this profession, this area, us, whether it's us at CyberCX, whether it's other people listening who are security professionals in companies or government departments, we just need to ask for help. And it'll be, I think we'll be amazed at the type of people that come and say, well, I'd like to give it a go, but I don't have qualifications. And frankly, that might be a good thing because, again, the diversity of thought we've got at the moment is not solving the problem.
Yeah,
Thanks, Shannon.
very good. Thanks, Alastair, and thanks, Snez. Next question, I think we've probably already answered. It's do you have a view about the importance of degree qualifications in this field? I think, Alastair, you've been very clear to saying, look, you don't, but maybe some advice to employees about, how they need to think about this differently.
Yeah, look, and I apologise. I do this too every week. I have the questions that are coming up because we know how good a planner I am. But look, again, I'll just reiterate that I'm not against degrees, clearly, but I think we need to disavow people of this concept that they've got to go do a computer science or an electrical engineering degree or a PhD in order to get into cybersecurity. If you're a musician, you're pretty good at maths, largely, so I read. If you've studied psychology, then you understand aspects of human behavior. And let's face it, this is, I'm surprised I haven't said it yet during this webinar. Cybersecurity is a human problem, not a technical one. We've got technologies, it's the humans that fail us, right? Every attacker, whether they're a nation state or a criminal group, goes after the wet layer as part of their process. I mean, we go after the end user. So let's be sensible about this and say that a psychologist, someone that studied psychology, could be really useful in a cybersecurity sense, because how do we design out problems and convince people not to click on things and other such things? Now, vocational training, absolutely. But the vocational sector has failed, right? I mean, and I say that lovingly to them, and if anyone's on this call in that sector, I'm not being critical. There were some fascinating things in the financial review, some charts that were out when the government first started talking about this JobMaker program, just about the drop in numbers of young people doing vocational training. And it's a sign that the sector is just not teaching what people think they need to be taught, because they're not churning out the people that are going to be getting employment. Now, we all know that we need to have more vocationally trained people in this country, not just from a cybersecurity point of view, but in every single trade. So we've somehow allowed vocational training to get pretty dour. We've got to fix that up. As an industry, we need to be saying what skills we need. Australia was one of the first. There was an amazing initiative that came out from all of the TAFE sector across Australia, agreed on a national curriculum for Cert 4 in cybersecurity. That's a pretty fantastic landmark for us, frankly. And I think that that we should build upon that. And again, I'm going to say what I said before, and I'm sorry for just burning time, but if it's just getting a qualification from one of the big vendors, which frankly a lot of organizations will pay for a person either retreading themselves out of one profession into another, or they're a young person looking to break in. There are some really good short courses out there that just let you know how to drive a particular piece of tech. And that alone is needed more in this industry, let alone people with PhDs. And by the way, I encourage people who are doing PhDs in cybersecurity. We need more of that too, but it needs to be pyramid shaped, and the base needs to be largely vocational or on-the-job trained people. And as an organisation, and I know Snez is committed to this. I know our CEO John Paterides, JP, is as well. That we need to be building people off the streets into cybersecurity professionals. As an organisation alone, we are not going to be able to go to the market to hire the number of people we need, given the growth we have as a company. And the same goes back to that issue of what the gap is in the market. Same goes for every other cybersecurity company or any organisation that needs an internal cybersecurity skill. So there is something wrong, and we can't just keep looking at the problem and complaining about it. We need to shift away from the tertiary sector. We need to shift away from seeing the tertiary sector as the sole solution, and instead be investing as well in vocational and on-the-job training. There endeth the lesson, Shannon. Sorry.
No, it's fantastic. Thanks, Alastair. And Snez, I might we might jump to the next question in the interest of time, but maybe take an element of what Alastair has just provided in terms of his response and focus more the rest of this question around, should we be hiring on the basis of attitude and aptitude, and should that be the key focus rather than entirely skills focused?
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Look, 100% agree with Alastair. We can't just look at one single source of where we find the skills, because they're just not going to be there. So I think in relation to that second question, look, my motto has always been, you should always hire attitude over aptitude. It's easy to teach that other stuff, but it's really hard to change someone's attitude. Just having supported and coached leaders to deal with people challenges in the workplace, the attitude stuff is really hard. So I've always encouraged my leaders to always look for the right attitude, to look for all those attributes that they want to see in their team members, whether it's being a team player or whether it's working to get something done for the customer, or focusing on being a good communicator and all of those great things. Now, that's not to say that we should downplay the aptitude stuff, because so clearly in some roles it's critical. Going to Alastair's point around, you can teach a lot of that stuff on the job. You can still hire people who've got technical qualifications, and that is important. There's a place for that, and there always will be. But my experience is, once you've got that, or you should always hire attitude over aptitude, and you'll always get a better outcome, in my view.
Fantastic. Well, that's great. Thanks, Nez. We might just jump into our second poll. Simply in the interest of time, we've got some somewhat controversial questions coming, so I'd like to get to those if we possibly can. So how important is it to your organisation to utilise Australian domiciled skill sets in addressing the skills shortage? Is it vital? We rely on local firms as part of our strategy. Somewhat important, we engage desired skill sets wherever they are, or where possible. It's not important, it's not an evaluation criteria, or don't know. We'll wait a few seconds and get a good series of responses there and feed those back to you in a little while. I might preempt the next question, Alastair, just whilst we close this poll out. Really good question, somewhat controversial. Australian executives appear to be woefully undereducated in the need for having a CISO sitting at the board table. How can we best educate boards that they need that skill set included in their decision-making process? Now, first of all, that assumes that you should have a CISO at the board table, but I wouldn't mind you sort of providing a little bit of commentary around that one, if that's okay.
Yep. Well, Shannon, firstly, as you know, I'm an advocate of the CSO role rather than a CISO role. I actually do think that increasingly we should just be talking about chief security officers, where we take an all hazards approach. We know cybersecurity is just, fundamentally, one of the great threats. You've heard me mention it multiple times, already today. So a CSO, absolutely. We know, as I've said already, cybersecurity is high on the risk register of most organisations, 1, 2, or 3 on that risk register. So there's no doubt that a CSO/CISO should be definitely reporting very regularly to the governance and risk committee of a board. So it might be a sub part of the board, but certainly there needs to be very, very regular contact with at least that subcommittee. And look, most of the really good organisations I see are saying that the CSO is meeting quarterly or so with the board, giving an update to the whole board and being asked questions. That's a radical shift in what we've seen over the last couple of years. I mean, really fundamental. And we've seen that shift again. I'm going to go back to 2016, where I'd say, it's only 4 years ago, when the former Prime Minister launched that cybersecurity strategy. And part of that, one of the bits in the strategy was that we'd look at sort of the ASX companies to see how their boards were dealing with cybersecurity, and it was quite heartening to see that they were starting to ask questions. We often know that you start asking questions before you know what the answers should be, and I think we're starting to see the market mature there. I think the AICD has done a good job of trying to educate. I think there's a lot more that can be done. Those are with the publicly listed boards. There's been an increased regulatory push, certainly much more push of individual risk and liability to directors, many would argue it's almost getting too hot for them, and you're going to start seeing smart people not wanting to go on boards because they don't want the risks. So we've got to balance that carefully. But certainly, I think we've seen a good shift in Australia, and I've travelled a lot around the world and spoken with governments and businesses around the world, and I think we can hold, I think from an Australian point of view, we can be pretty pleased with the progress we've made over a short period. I can only see it getting better, Shannon. Look, you never get you never hang up a mission a company sign when it comes to cybersecurity. What you can say is it's much more embedded into business processes. The last thing I'd say to this is the best organisations that I deal with are the ones that actually see cybersecurity not just as a way of dealing with risk, but they see it as an enabler for their business more holistically. So you can be more agile, you can go into parts of the economy that are harder if you've got cybersecurity sort of better focused in your organisation and more embedded in all of the aspects you do. So it actually can be a black ink part of your organisation, not just a red ink part that you feel like you've got to have or a regulator tells you you must have. So the more we can move it towards cybersecurity being a business enabler and you know, one of the great protectors against some of those threat vectors, then the better off we'll be. Thanks.
Okay, no, very good. Thanks, Alastair. Look, we might just jump to the next one. Again, we do have a whole heap of questions that are still to come in and a whole heap online, so thank you for those. I think we'll probably end up running maybe a subsequent session on this because it does seem to be an area of very sincere focus. Snez, how do we enable cross-training and foster educational skills pathways into cyber? We've talked about vocational training, we've talked about TAFEs and universities, and Alastair sort of also offered the option of maybe getting people from outside the industry, like biologists, etc. Do you have some comments to make in that area?
Look, I think it's definitely all of the above. You know, again, to my earlier point at the beginning, I think you need to have a comprehensive strategy to enable that cross training, to develop those skills pathways, whether that's a graduate program, bringing in junior talent, skilling them up, attracting people from various professions and sectors, and so I think all of that is all valid and should be part of a strategy to build those pathways for people. I think the other thing for me, having worked in this, in HR for quite some time, the number one reason why people leave organisations, and global research, no matter which organisation you study, when you do exit interviews, the number one reason why people leave an organisation is because of the lack of a career development opportunity. So I think as an organisation, we have a role to play in helping people develop their careers, being able to articulate what a pathway looks like for someone, whether it's a technical role, whether it's a leadership role, or what I call sort of a general athlete. And that's, having generalist experience across a range of practices or functions. So I think, building those career pathways, being able to educate and engage people through that process, whether that's, encouraging career conversations, being a mentor and establishing mentoring relationships to help people understand what potential pathways exist. So I think it's all of those things, Shannon.
Thanks, Nez. I'll rip through the next one. Alastair, I might get you to comment. What role should government play in building a sovereign cyber skills capability?
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Well, look, I've already said that I think government is one of those, is a training ground actually for people. Government, because obviously it's not profit driven, don't we all know that? Can invest in people in a way often that industry can't. So, the Australian Signals Directorate, the military, the police turn out and churn out different types of skilled people in the cybersecurity profession. They're not the only people, of course, but there's a role for government there. And it's funny, when I was in my different government roles the last time around in the federal government, the people would often wring their hands in government and say, oh my God, we can't keep these staff. How can we? We can't compete with private sector wages. We can't compete with the workplaces in the private sector. And I'd say, well, is that a bad thing? I mean, if I've got staff leaving government, so long as I've got a pipeline of people I can train and recruit, if they're leaving and going and helping protect either multinational corporations or Australian companies and the communities they live in, that's not a bad thing, right? It's not a I lose, they win scenario. It's a, well, community can win. So I think there's a role for government in training and building those skills, and it's a great pipeline. There's no doubt government has a role in regulating the market. I think this is an area where we've not seen as much leadership from government as I would like, and I used to say that in government, and I'll certainly keep saying it out of government. You know, what does a cybersecurity professional look like? I mean, I used to say that anyone with a ponytail and a MacBook could basically palm themselves off as a cybersecurity expert. And yet my local barber, who we know I haven't visited for a long time given my follically challenged nature, had more regulation about them. They had to have gone and done a course. The council comes in and checks that they sterilise the scissors and the combs and that you sweep up the hair. But with cybersecurity, none. But the government has a role in that regulatory space in terms of saying who can be and what those skill sets should be. And there's no doubt that the government has a role in subsidising nation building activities. That's what governments do. And I've already mentioned the job maker that the Prime Minister's announced, and I think it's a golden opportunity for Australia to sit there and say, this is an area where, frankly, our country already punches above its weight in terms of our cybersecurity skill set. And we do. I mean, Australians are fantastic at thinking we're no good at anything, but in cybersecurity, we're better than, pound for pound, we're better than others, many others, and we should be building that, and we should be using federal government funds like the good old days of Commonwealth scholarships to be training people in this area. Sure as hell they're going to get jobs, we know that. We've already talked about the skill shortage, and it's a great part of the economy for us to be growing and selling to the rest of the world. So again, I sound a bit impassioned about this, Shannon. I hope I do, because this is a role that government should play, and it's a role that country needs to partner in.
No, very good. And you're right, it is important. Snez, maybe just a quick comment. We aren't going to be able to get to all of our questions, but maybe a comment around traineeships and apprenticeships and whether that has a role in bringing those skills through. Just on that last point, and then we'll jump to the last question we're going to have time for.
Yeah, look, I think definitely, you know, there's a role there for people coming through those, you know, through those parts of the education sector. But, you know, from my perspective, you know, if you think, you know, going to some of the earlier points both Alastair and I made, that, you know, there are so many different roles, so many different professions in the cybersecurity industry that, you know, we shouldn't just think about, you know, technical skills. I think, you know, if I was to pick, you know, the types of skills and the types of people that we want, it's people who are great problem solvers, great thinkers, people who, you know, are self-starters, people who can just dive in, are willing to learn, are willing to adapt and grow their skills and grow their careers. I mean, that's what I would place more emphasis on.
Okay, thanks, Nez. Alastair, look, we have got more questions to go, but I might just get you to give us a quick 30-second response on how important is fundamental research, computer science, semiconductors, quantum, number theory, etc., in building a comprehensive Australian security capability and capacity.
Well, firstly, I'm shocked that we've gone over time. I do apologise. But hey, that's the anarchic nature of these things. Look, clearly really important. I mean, that's a short answer. We've got federally funded 2 really good organisations that help build Australia's broader cyber capacity, and that's obviously AusCyber and the CyberCRC. And clearly, we need to be developing, you know, a much broader capability than just pure cybersecurity. So the industry around it, we've got some fantastic companies. One thing I'll say to you is this, Shannon, I've traveled the world, you know, usually on the government dime, and, you know, dealt with governments and corporates all around the world. I am sick and tired of hearing how good the Americans are at developing cybersecurity stuff, or the Israelis. Both fantastic countries, by the way, really fantastic, and have great cybersecurity industries. But why do we think we are deficient compared to them. We're not. Now, I don't want the existential threats that have helped make the Israeli cybersecurity industry such an amazing one, but why can't we grow an organic Australian capability in cybersecurity? The answer is, well, we can, and we're showing that we can. And they don't need to be multi-billion-dollar programs. They just need to be small sets of funds that help focus people and help grow an industry. I don't think there's ever enough of those funds, but I think we're doing really well with what we've got. And absolutely all of those bits are very important for the future of Australia.
Thanks, Alastair, and thank you, Snez. I think that's been great today. We will try and get some of those answers, or some answers to some of your questions provided after this webinar. We hope that the information today has been useful and certainly thought-provoking, certainly around building sovereignty and skill sets and capability for the nation. Thanks for attending today. We will be jumping straight to the poll. We'll give you the results of the poll questions in the interest of time. And just a quick additional word, in the lead up to financial year, we'll take a break from the cyber dialogue webinars, but we'll kick them off again in July with topics such as cyber sovereignty around cyber threat intelligence, building an international cyber career. We'll look at the SASE framework, which is a fairly new framework around secure access service edge technology. And we'll also ensure that we provide any answers to the questions that you have asked today that haven't been able to answer. What's the most important factor in addressing diversity, gender diversity in cyber? Strong leadership, 21%, greater awareness and culture, 21%, a focus on building multifunction teams, 29%, and better education pathways into STEM subjects at school, 26%, and 3% don't know. So fairly well spread, those answers. We might jump into the second poll result now. Okay, how important is it to your organisation to utilise Australian domiciled skill set? 31% said vital, 38% said somewhat important, not important at all for 3%, and 28% said don't know. So that's great. Thank you for those results. Look, please do help us create even better Q&A webinars by completing the survey at the end of this session and letting us know what other topics you would like us to cover. Everyone will receive a recording of this webinar today via email, and we'll post it to our website as well, so you've got access to that. Thanks again for your time, and apologies for running slightly over for today. Thank you again.